Montana Territory, October 1881, the first time Archer Ellery saw her. She came stumbling out of the cottonwoods barefoot, her dress torn and dust-stained, her voice gone like someone had wrung it right out of her throat. It was near sundown. The sky washed gold behind the Bitterroot Mountains, and he was finishing up with the last of his cattle near the river bend. The sound of hooves and creaking saddle was all he heard until she appeared wild-eyed, arms scraped, and breathing hard like she had run through miles of hell. She nearly collapsed trying to cross the creek. "Whoa," Archer muttered, kicking his boots out of the stirrups and dropping down fast. "Ma'am, easy now." She flinched when he reached for her, but her legs gave out and he caught her before she hit the rocks. Her skin was cold and her hands trembled. She tried to speak, but no sound came. "It's all right," he said softly, lifting her up as gentle as he could. "I got you." He wrapped his saddle blanket around her, tucking it close around her shoulders. She didn't fight him, only leaned into his chest, shivering hard. She had no shoes, no bag, no obvious sign of where she had come from, just a busted dress and silent mouth. Archer looked around the empty riverbanks. No wagon, no horse, no one chasing her, but the fear was still in her eyes. "Can you nod for me?" he asked. "Are you hurt bad?" She blinked once, then shook her head slowly. Her throat moved like she was trying to speak, but not a sound came. "All right. We'll ride back to my place. You'll be warm. Safe." She didn't nod, but she didn't resist either when he lifted her onto his horse and climbed up behind her. Archer's ranch sat 5 miles up a pine-lined trail. The ride was quiet, save for the wind through the trees and the occasional hitch in her breath. She didn't look back once. She just held tight to the reins, her hands shaking every few steps. By the time they reached the cabin, the moon was up and frost was already creeping in from the hills. He helped her down, carried her inside, and set her by the fire. His dog, Boone, gave a low bark, then settled back down once he saw her. "Name's Archer," he said, setting a kettle on the stove. "You do not have to say anything. Just rest." She looked at him, her lips parting like she wanted to try, then closed them again. Her eyes were rimmed red. Not from tears, those were long gone, but from whatever came after them. He found one of his old flannel shirts and a pair of cotton pants and turned his back while she changed. When she sat back down by the fire, her hair was damp from the basin, her hands wrapped tight around a tin cup of broth. "Can I ask your name?" he said gently. She hesitated. Then with a finger she traced a shaky D in the hearth soot. "D," he asked. "Is that the start?" She nodded. He waited. She swallowed, then held up 4 fingers. 4 letters, she nodded again. "Dora, Dina, Dana." She froze at that one, then gave a small nod. "Dana," he said. "All right, Dana it is." She stared at him, silent, but there was something in her eyes, recognition maybe. Trust was too early a word. But she was not afraid of him. He let her sleep in his bed that night while he took the cot near the fire. Boone curled up beside her without being asked, and she didn't seem to mind. She slept like someone who had not slept in days, dead still, but tense, like her body did not know how to let go. The next morning, Archer made biscuits and coffee. She ate without talking, but her color had come back a little. He noticed the bruises on her arms now that the firelight was gone. Faded, but there. A man had done that, no doubt. After breakfast, she scribbled something in the soot again. A few letters this time. "Care," he asked. She frowned, then tapped her chest. Then pointed toward the door. "Care. Someone you care about out there." She nodded, then held up 2 fingers. Then made a small cradle shape with her arms. His stomach turned. "Children." "You have 2, she nodded. "Where?" She pointed west. "How far?" She shrugged, then curled her hands into fists. Her breathing picked up again. "Hey, easy. You do not have to go alone. You are not alone anymore." He stood, walked over to her, and crouched down so they were eye level. We will find them." Her eyes welled with something close to hope. He added, "And whoever hurt you, they will not get near you again." When her hand brushed his knuckles, he did not pull away. She held on tight, eyes searching his face like she was trying to make sure he meant it. He did. They set out that afternoon. She could not ride alone. Her legs were still too weak, so she rode with him again, arms curled tight around his waist. She did not speak, but her grip told him she was remembering. They stopped that night at a halfway post outside an old mining camp. Archer traded for supplies and asked around quiet like about a woman with 2 kids, a wagon, and trouble. Old man at the post office scratched his beard. "Heard something like that. Fella named Trask brought a woman and 2 young'uns through here last week. Said she was his wife, but she looked like she wanted to bolt." Archer's jaw tightened. "Where'd they head?" "West, toward the Bitterroot line. Might be on that old homestead trail." Archer gave Dana a look. She nodded quickly, mouth pressed tight. They rode hard the next morning, Dana growing stronger by the hour. She still did not speak, but her eyes were clearer now. She pointed out little things, broken wheel marks, a piece of faded ribbon snagged on a branch. By dusk, they reached a split in the trail. Dana tensed in the saddle, then pointed to the left. They found the campsite by the river. Abandoned, but the ashes were fresh. Dana slipped down from the horse and moved fast, her fingers brushing the ground. She found a small cloth doll tucked near a tree root. She held it to her chest and sank to her knees. Archer knelt beside her. "We are close. I promise you." She turned to him and for the first time leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into him, blanket and all. She made no sound, but her body shook with quiet sobs. "It is all right," he whispered. "You are safe now. I got you." Her dress was torn. Her voice was gone, but she was not alone, and he would not stop until her children were safe too. They left the river camp before first light, dew still clinging to the grass and the scent of wet pine thick in the air. Dana rode with her arms braced against Archer's back, her fingers pressed firm against his coat like she needed the weight of him to keep from unraveling. The doll she'd found was tied to her belt with a strip of cloth torn from her old dress. The trail veered northward through a narrow ravine where the trees grew close, and the rocks bore shallow grooves from wagon wheels long gone. Archer kept his rifle across his lap, and his eyes on the tracks. A second set of hoofprints had joined the wagon somewhere back before the river, lighter, cleaner, maybe a guide or a hired man. But the boot prints beside them were deep and uneven. Someone in a hurry, someone angry. Dana shifted behind him and tapped his shoulder twice, then pointed to a broken branch overhead. "Fresh," Archer said. "They passed through yesterday, maybe less." She nodded, mouth drawn tight. By midday, they reached a wide clearing littered with churned earth and trampled grass. Archer dismounted and crouched low, brushing aside crushed sage to reveal the outline of a boot heel near the fire pit. The ashes were cold, but not old. Dana stepped down without waiting for his hand, moving with a steadiness that hadn't been there the day before. She walked slow around the edge of the camp, eyes sharp. He watched her kneel and pick something up near a charred log, a length of twine, knotted at both ends. He took it from her, fingers brushing hers. "Used for binding," he murmured. "Wrist size." She didn't respond, only stood and moved toward a tree where a strip of canvas hung from a low branch. Archer followed her gaze. A canvas tarp, torn and stained, fluttered in the breeze like a flag. There were no graves, no blood signs, but the silence in the clearing held a tension that made Archer's skin crawl. "They moved fast," he said. "Didn't pack down. Might have been spooked." Dana glanced west, then touched her chest with 2 fingers and held them out toward the trees. "You feel them close?" he asked. She nodded. They pushed on through the afternoon, the sun slipping low behind the ridges. The trail narrowed again, this time threading between granite outcrops where the wind whistled low and dry. Dana's hand found his side again. Not for balance she rode steady now, but to anchor. He didn't speak, just let her hold on. As they crested a rise, Archer reined in. Below, tucked against a stand of cedar, sat a wagon. The canvas was slashed and sagging, one wheel sunk deep into the soil. No oxen. No smoke. Dana slid off the horse before he could stop her and ran, her boots barely touching the ground. "Wait." Archer dismounted and followed, rifle ready. Dana reached the wagon and froze. He caught up just as she lifted a small handkerchief from the ground. Embroidered on the corner was a clumsy D, stitched in red thread. She turned, eyes wide not with fear but certainty. "Yours?" She nodded hard, then pointed toward a shallow trail leading into the trees. Archer stepped ahead, scanning the brush. A low cry broke the stillness, not loud, but enough to freeze him in place. He turned to Dana. Her eyes were full of tears. She pushed past him and ran. They found the children in a hollow beneath a fallen log, huddled beneath a moth-eaten quilt. A girl, no older than 7, and a boy just past 4. Both filthy, eyes wide and wild, but alive. The girl saw Dana and burst into tears, scrambling from the blanket. "Mama!" Dana caught her mid-run and sank to her knees, pulling both children into her arms. The boy clung to her skirt, sobbing into the fabric. The girl wrapped her arms around Dana's neck and wouldn't let go. Archer stepped back, giving them space, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. The way she held them, like she'd been holding her breath for years. Her face crumpled, and she buried her nose against the girl's hair, rocking them both in a slow, silent rhythm. He let the quiet stretch, watching the shadows lengthen beneath the trees. When Dana finally looked up, her face was streaked with dirt and tears, but there was something else there now, something rooted. Her eyes met Archer's and held. She mouthed something, he couldn't hear it, but she tried again. "Thank you." The sound was rough, barely a whisper. But it was her voice. He nodded, throat thick. "You're welcome." The boy turned then, eyes wary, and took a step toward him. Archer crouched low, offering his hand palm up. The boy stared, then placed his tiny fingers in Archer's just for a moment. Dana watched it happen, then leaned forward and pressed her forehead to her daughter's. Archer rose slowly. "We'll stay here tonight. Wagon's got some shelter left. I'll keep watch." Dana didn't speak again, but when he passed her the canteen, her hand lingered half a second more than necessary. Not looking for comfort, offering it. That night he built a fire with care, using dry twigs and pine needles. Boone curled at the base of the wagon, ears twitching. The children slept between Dana and the wheel, wrapped in spare blankets. She sat upright, eyes on the flames, her hand resting lightly on her daughter's back. Archer sat across from her, rifle nearby, hat pushed back. She looked over at him through the smoke and let her eyes stay there. He didn't need her to say anything more. Not yet. She had found her children. Her name had returned to his ears, and her voice, cracked and fragile, had begun to come back. He would listen until it was whole. By the second morning, the children had begun to speak in full, if cautious, sentences. Ellie was protective, wary of Archer's presence, but observant in a way children grow into early when the world tilts hard on them. Caleb, smaller and more easily distracted, clung to Dana's skirts and mimicked the rhythm of her steps as they walked the perimeter of the clearing. Archer had scouted the area before dawn, leaving his rifle slung over his shoulder and bringing back a few late-season chokecherries and a pair of rabbits. The meat cooked fast over the flames, and the children ate without needing coaxing. Dana sat beside them, her eyes always moving, watching the brush, the slope behind the wagon, the tree line to the north. She hadn't spoken again, not since that cracked whisper. But she no longer avoided his gaze. When she passed him a cup of water, she looked directly at him, her fingers steady. "You made good time tracking," Archer said, careful to keep his tone mild. "Saw that broken sapling, too, but I would have missed the thread caught in the bark." Dana looked down at her lap, where her hands rested, folded and still. Then she reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a scrap of gingham cloth, faded blue with a tear down one side. She held it out. He took it gently, turning the fabric in his fingers. "Caleb's shirt," she nodded once. "You kept it to mark the trail." She nodded again, then tapped the side of her head. "Smart," Archer murmured. "You remembered where he'd torn it." This time she didn't reply, but the corner of her mouth lifted, not quite a smile, more muscle memory than anything, but it stayed. Ellie stood and crossed to Dana, whispering something into her ear. Dana bent to listen, then looked back at Archer. "Ellie wants to know if we'll have to go back to where her pa is." The words sat between them like a dropped stone. Archer didn't answer right away. He turned the scrap of shirt over once more, then tucked it into the inside flap of his coat. "No," he said. "Not unless you choose it." Dana's breath caught. Her shoulders curved slightly inward, not in fear, but in something loosening. "Where was he taking you?" Archer asked quietly. "You can nod if you want." Dana glanced at the children before reaching for a stick and drawing a rough line in the dirt. She added a mark at one end, shaped like a small box. "Mining camp," Archer guessed. She drew a circle over the box, then crossed it out. "Dead camp," she nodded. He exhaled. So he was running from something. Dana looked up, eyes sharp. "Someone after him." She hesitated, then pointed to the south. "Sheriff," a shake of her head. Archer frowned. "Another man," a slow nod. He leaned back on his heels. "He takes something that wasn't his." Dana's jaw tightened. She didn't answer. Archer didn't press. He stood and began cleaning up the fire pit, letting the silence settle again. The children had wandered toward the stream, Boone trailing after them like a quiet guardian. Dana remained seated, her hands now clasped behind her knees. When he returned, she was looking toward the hills. "You thinking about staying near here?" She tilted her head, uncertain. "Well," Archer said, brushing soot from his palms, "there's a small cabin west of my land. Was my uncle's place back before he died. It's empty now, but it's sound. Needs a bit of mending." Dana turned to him, brows lifted. "You and the children could take it. I could help get it ready, if you want." She blinked, then looked toward the kids again. Ellie was crouched by the creek, stacking stones. Caleb tossed sticks into the current. "You'd be safe," Archer added. "No one gets through those woods without my knowing." Dana stood slowly, brushing earth from her dress. She walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. Her eyes searched his face, calm but waited. He waited. Then she reached out, not touching, but hovering her hand close to his chest over where he'd tucked the cloth. He didn't move. She let her hand drop, but her gaze stayed fixed. Then she nodded once. "I'll ride ahead," he said. "Clear the place. Make sure there's no rot in the beams. You'll need a stove, some oil. I'll bring them." Dana stepped aside, pulling Ellie close as the girl came running up the hill. Archer knelt beside Caleb, ruffling the boy's hair gently. The child didn't flinch. "I'll be back before nightfall," he promised. "Stay near the wagon." Dana met his eyes again and gave a single, firm nod. As he mounted, Archer looked once more at the three of them, Dana standing tall with her children beside her, the breeze lifting the edges of her coat. She was still thin, still healing. But the way she held herself now told him she planned to stay upright. He turned the horse toward the west, the ridge line casting long shadows across the land. Behind him, the fire crackled low, and the sound of a girl's laughter broke briefly through the quiet. It was the first time he'd heard it. The cabin sat tucked beneath a line of firs where the land dipped toward a marshy bend in the creek. Archer had cleared the brush from the front steps and patched the roof, where a few shingles had slipped free during the last hard wind. He'd brought a new stovepipe, a sack of oats, and a bolt of muslin, which he left folded neatly on the table inside. The place smelled of old pine and dry dust, but the walls were solid and the back door latched clean. Dana arrived on foot, leading the children along the trail with Boone trotting at their side. Archer met them at the gate. Ellie clutched a bundle of wildflowers and glanced up at the cabin with open suspicion. "There's no cellar," Archer offered, nodding toward the slope, "but the creek's close by, and I laid in some water from the spring." Dana stepped up onto the porch, fingertips brushing the doorframe. She pushed gently and it swung inward to the dim, clean quiet. Caleb wandered in behind her and made straight for the hearth. Archer had left a small pile of kindling there. The boy crouched beside it, tracing the edge of a stone with one finger. Ellie lingered outside, squinting toward the thinning tree line. Dana turned. "There's no one else," she said, voice husky and low. Archer stilled. She looked down, almost surprised by her own words. Then, steadier, "No one followed us. No one will." He stepped onto the porch beside her. "You sure?" She nodded, eyes fixed on the edge of his collar. "I was afraid I'd lost it," she added. "My voice, but it came back." "You brought it back," he said. "You and them." Dana leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "I've never had my own place, not one that stayed put." Archer looked out across the clearing. "Well, this one doesn't move." That brought a huff of air from her half-laugh, half-breath, but she didn't look away. Inside, Ellie called out, "Mama, there's a little bed in the corner." "Can I have it?" Dana stepped in, brushing her hand over the sill as she passed. Archer stayed on the porch, giving her the room to claim it. That night, he lit the lantern outside and ate by the woodpile, giving them time to settle the space. Boone curled up beside him, tail flicking now and then against his boot. When Dana stepped out after the children had gone quiet, her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, and her hair was tied back with a strip of cloth. She sat beside him without speaking. He passed her a tin cup of warm cider. She took it, nodding in thanks. Then, after a pause, "You ever lose someone?" He kept his eyes on the fire's edge. "My brother, caught in a spring thaw up near Lolo Pass. Horse went through the ice with him." Dana cradled the cup between her palms. "I had a sister once, younger. She died before Ellie was born." "Fever. Hard thing," he said. "Being the one left." Dana's hands tightened slightly around the cup. "Harder when you can't stop it, when you see it coming and all you can do is hold on." They sat a while longer, listening to the wind shift through the grass. After a while, she said, "He wanted to trade them." Archer turned. Dana didn't blink. Said he'd get more for the girl, but the boy was still young enough to train. A cold weight settled in Archer's gut. "I ran the first night I saw the man he meant to sell them to. Took off with nothing. Hid until you found me." Archer didn't speak. He reached over and laid a hand gently over hers where it rested on her knee. She didn't flinch. "I didn't know if I'd make it back to them," she said. "You did," Archer said. Dana looked at his hand, then laced her fingers through his. "You helped me do that." He held on, slow and sure. The moon rose above the ridge, pale and full, casting long silver lines across the yard. Inside, the quiet creak of the floorboards marked the shifting weight of sleeping children. Dana leaned her shoulder against his. "I'd like to stay here. You can, I mean with you." Archer turned toward her, his voice low. "If that's what you want." Dana looked up, eyes clear. "It is." He didn't answer right away, just leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, soft and steady. She closed her eyes. The lantern flickered, throwing warm light across the porch. They stayed like that, hands clasped, shoulders touching, while the wind curled gentle through the trees. The first real snow came in mid-November. drifting down in slow, quiet sheets that turned the valley pale and muffled the world in stillness. Dana stood on the front step of the cabin, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, watching the flakes gather on the railings. Inside, Ellie hummed to herself while threading dried berries onto a string, and Caleb lay curled beside Boone on a bed of old quilts. The warmth of the stove filled the space with the scent of pine and simmering broth. Archer returned just before dusk, snow clinging to his coat and hat, a brace of grouse slung over one shoulder. He stomped his boots clean on the porch, then opened the door and stepped into the glow without a word. Dana turned from the fire and met his eyes. "I passed a rider on the North Trail," Archer said, voice low. "Said he was looking for a man with a crooked nose and a limp. Sounded like someone who'd been tracking Trask." Dana didn't answer right away. She set down the wooden spoon she'd been using and wiped her hands on her apron. "He's still following the trail." "Not anymore," Archer said. "I pointed him east." She nodded slowly. "You think he'll find him? If he's smart, he'll steer clear of this valley. The law's not the only thing that'll catch up to him." Dana lifted the kettle and poured 2 cups. "He never thought anyone would come after us. Figured he'd broken me down enough." Archer took the cup she offered. "He didn't know you." She looked at him then, truly looked, eyes steady beneath the faint lines of fatigue. "Neither did I." He set the cup down and reached for her hand. "You do now." She let him take it, fingers warm and calloused from the last weeks of work. "You've been bringing wood before I wake, teaching Ellie how to set snares, letting Caleb follow you around like your shadow. You didn't have to do any of it." "I wanted to," he said. "Still do." Her hand tightened in his. "I don't want to leave." "You don't need to." "I mean ever," she said. "I want to build something here, something that stays." He bent slightly and brushed his lips across her knuckles. "Then we'll build it." That night, after the children had curled together beneath the quilts and the fire had burned low, Dana stepped outside and found Archer sitting at the edge of the porch, sharpening the blade of his old carving knife. The moon hung heavy above the trees, and the snow had stopped falling, leaving the ground smooth and untouched. She sat beside him and handed him a small bundle wrapped in muslin. "I found this tucked in the wagon's floorboard. Ellie must have hidden it." He unwrapped it gently. A small carving a horse, rough but recognizable, with a tiny saddle notched into its back. "She made it for Caleb," Dana said. "Said she was saving it for when he had something of his own." Archer turned the figurine over in his hands. "She's got your grit." "She's got more than that," Dana murmured. Then, after a moment, "I want them to have more than running and fear. I want them to remember this as the place where things got quiet." He looked at her. "They will." She leaned into his side, her head resting against his shoulder. "You were part of that. I plan to keep being." The wind picked up lightly, stirring the trees. Dana turned her face toward him. "You still got that ring you used to wear?" Archer blinked, surprised. "My mother's." "Yeah. You ever think about using it?" He studied her face, then reached into his coat and pulled the ring from the pouch stitched into the lining. The silver band had dulled with age, but the etching of mountain flowers was still clear. "I haven't thought of anyone wearing it since she passed," he said, voice hushed. "Not until now." Dana held out her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger, the fit snug but right. When she looked up at him, her eyes held the steadiness of someone who had crossed a long stretch of broken land and decided, finally, to stay. They went inside together, the door shutting softly behind them. The winter deepened, but the days settled into rhythm. Archer built a new coop, and Dana sewed bedding from old flour sacks. Ellie learned to read from the worn primer Archer had kept since boyhood, and Caleb learned to tie knots and whistle through his teeth. Each evening, the 4 of them gathered by the fire, Dana's shawl draped across the back of her chair, Archer's boots drying by the hearth. The children curled on the rug with Boone between them. By spring, the garden rows were marked and tilled. Dana planted beans and potatoes with her sleeves rolled high, hands in the earth, hair tucked beneath a sun-bleached kerchief. Archer built a fence along the back edge of the pasture, and Ellie ran the length of it, counting each post. On the first warm night of May, Dana stood beside the creek, watching the water move in slow, glassy ripples. Archer came up behind her, arms circling her waist. "Never thought peace would look like this," she said. "Looks good on you." She turned, resting her hands on his chest. "We're going to be all right, aren't we? We already are." He kissed her, then not with heat or urgency, but with the deep, quiet knowing of a man who'd found his place beside the one woman who had looked at him and stayed. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, the windows lit soft from within, the sound of the children's laughter drifting out into the warm night, and their life stretched on ahead, simple, rooted, and theirs.